Hey everybody! So it's me and Kyle here today, kind of for a more informal bit of club chat. This is mostly just a discussion about a passion that we have shared for a very long time, something that has been with us through thick and thin, through heartbreak and good times. So, I'm Sam.
And I'm Kyle.
And welcome to a talk about cartoons.
So, obviously, for our channel, we have sort of focused more on anime and video games, so this is a little bit out there, but this will kind of draw back to anime proper, as we are going to not only be discussing Western animation and the cartoons that we enjoy and grew up with, but we're gonna kind of be focusing on cartoons as they've taken inspiration from anime, the way that they have evolved over time and kind of become the things that we just really, really enjoy.
Absolutely. We definitely have a loophole that we're working with here. So, like Kyle said, we're going to loop back around and tie it all together with a nice big bow. And actually, we'll be starting this discussion talking about anime too, because in our eyes, where things really kicked off with Western animation as far as having this inspiration from Japanimation, was with the Pokemon cartoon/anime and with the 4Kids dubs. As terrible as they are, they really changed the game as far as Western kids media goes.
No, straight up. Shows like, for instance, we talk in a more broad sense, Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, 90s anime that were brought over to the West, dubbed. Those get introduced to Western audiences, and that builds a lot of hype for those kind of shows. Then you get stuff like Pokemon, Digimon, and all of these shows that 4Kids started dubbing over and presenting, that created this sort of general idea of what anime was, and it was pretty well received for a long period.
Oh yeah, anime was loved by a whole lot of American kids before we even were conscious of what anime was. And I mean, like, I remember from my childhood, I would have swimming lessons and I would hurry home so I could catch the next episode of One Piece. Did I know anything about Japan? No, I just knew that I loved those wacky sailors.
It's so fun, and when you're a kid, you kind of have a certain innocence to it because it is just another cartoon to you. It's a more exciting cartoon, and it's definitely different from what you'd be seeing on TV. Besides that, this was really unique, and I think that was what kicked off this new movement of shows that wanted to incorporate that sort of anime style alongside more serious stories.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like, it was something completely different, and even if, like, we didn't know what it was growing up, we still knew that this was, like, nothing we'd seen before. This is, specifically, I think the big thing that puts anime kind of aside from everything else that we tend to see in Western media is the fact that it's all very plot-driven, in that even from episode 1, it's not just meant to be this, like, reset at the end of the episode thing like a lot of Western cartoons are, but instead that everything's working towards a goal very purposefully, and there's a certain way that you're supposed to watch these. And we really, at the time, did not have a whole lot of that in America, or in Canada in your case.
Yeah.
In the West.
But yeah, no, like, getting to see shows start to embrace this overarching narrative with, you know, like, occasional outlier episodes, sort of wacky, oddball stuff, like, that's not uncommon for anime either, but seeing that be pushed to the forefront of what we were considering to be just, like, the general cartoon sea that we were all swimming in, that was just so exciting. And obviously, you know, like, for kids who grew up with anime, that's fun, but there were also equally as many people who were kind of against this new movement right at the start.
Mm-hmm. Like, there was definitely a bit of pushback at the start, and I mean, like, it can be understandable, because if you think about 4Kids is notorious for changing so much in the shows that they were showing, because, I mean, One Piece proper is not, like, the most kid-friendly thing out there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's certainly not a slasher movie or a horror flick, deep psychological trauma, but, like, there's some stuff that parents would not like to see.
No, absolutely.
What you were saying before about the fact that, like, things were changed and Western creators kind of wanted to latch onto this and to kind of get their own slice of the pie here. That kind of brings us to our first point in, like, our strange chronology of how cartoons have progressed because of anime's presence in the minds of the West. And that is the ever-famous, ever-loved Teen Titans series.
So I I was always kind of into comic books and superheroes as a kid. Like, my dad was into that,
You're
and
still
so he
into
got
them.
me into it. Yeah, no, of course, I'm still into it. I shouldn't talk in the past tense here, but no, like, Teen Titans was my shit growing up. It was so fun and so exciting, and it is blatantly trying to emulate an anime style, and the whole tone of the show, it was 100% trying for something more shonen anime.
Mm-hmm. I think, for me, the big smoking gun of, like, this is so anime-influenced is, first of all, there's the obvious fact that Hi Hi Puffy Ami Yumi, I think that's the band name, did the theme song, and that was very J-pop, like, that's a full-on Japanese band.
Yeah.
But also the fact that the expressions used in Teen Titans really emulated and embraced the anime style and the comic proportions. A lot of the expressions that you'd see in anime, the, like, plus sign anger, the sweat drops.
Yep.
You saw that all in Teen Titans as well, and so there was this immediate sort of visual connection. But, like Kyle said, it wasn't just visual, it was also in how the show was run as a story. Like, it was so long ago for me, like, I'm a bit on the younger side of people who watch Teen Titans, but something that will always stick with me is the arc surrounding Raven and her father. That was the most serious, legitimately cool and deep thing I had ever seen in a cartoon ever. Like,
oh yeah.
I will never forget that because that's had such a profound effect on me. I remember seeing it and being like, I just want more. I want to live in the world where this is the kind of content that I get to see, and these are the kind of stories that I get to see unfold.
Mm-hmm. No, I remember just getting to see, especially the first arc, I guess is probably the best way to word it, but the first arc of Teen Titans where, you know, like, the Titans are up against Slade, and you get to see that sort of relationship between Robin and Slade, like, that rivalry forming. That was so interesting to me, and it was something that I had never seen in any of these other cartoons that I'd grown up with. Like, you'd expect a little bit of, like, haha, you know, like, I'm the campy villain and you're the cool hero, like, in like
Slade
one
was
or two
not
shows.
Campy.
But but like in traditional Western cartoons. But this was something completely different because I was actually terrified of Slade growing up. And that is such a good sign of, like, you've written your kids' show well, because, like, as kind of counterintuitive as it is, you want to scare the kids watching it. You want them to be intimidated so that when the heroes end up inevitably beating Slade, that is a victory that feels so much more fulfilling.
Oh yeah. And I mean, like, mentioning Slade and Raven's father between the two of us, it kind of makes me realize that something really interesting about how Teen Titans told a story is, despite being a kid's show and being told, like, these people are the heroes, they're the good guys, there was always this ever-present kind of, like, looming temptation of evil between, like, Robin and Slade or Raven and her father, of kind of, like, this idea that maybe the good guy's not gonna stay a good guy. And I mean, we actually saw that kind of followed through on with Tara's arc.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I mean, there's also kind of that looming doubt early on, like with the whole Robin is Red X thing. Like, oh god, okay, so one of our heroes is actually trying to be a villain undercover, and is he actually being put under the wing of Slade? Like, can we trust Robin to come out in the end as a proper hero? There's all this muddled good and evil that I've really, like, the whole tone of Teen Titans was just so superb, and it's very rare to come across something like that, even now today.
Kyle, I think I know what we're going to be watching next now that we finished KO.
Oh, absolutely. No, and I guess just, like, one thing I do want to kind of fall back on a little bit is the aesthetic, I think, of Teen Titans is also heavily inspired by Japan and anime as well. Like, Jump City, the whole city that the show takes place in, does have a few sort of elements that resemble what we might consider Japan. But I also remember there was a sort of one-off movie that they did.
Trouble in Tokyo.
Yeah. And as a kid growing up, I actually didn't watch a whole lot of anime. I watched maybe Digimon and a few other outliers, but besides that, like, I wasn't super big into anime, so I didn't know a lot about Japan as a whole. So my actual two sources of information about Japanese culture were that, like, movie for Teen Titans, and there was an episode of, and I think it was multiple episodes of King of the Hill, where they go
my
to
gosh.
Tokyo for a stretch, and I remember Bobby Hill playing DDR and just like loving it, and I was like, this is Japan. This is what Japanese culture is.
I've never related to Bobby Hill more in my life than I do right now.
He's a goddamn hero, and we know it.
Okay, like, I don't want to get too non sequitur here, but King of the Hill is a very good animation.
Of course it is. It is a true anime. It's what it is.
The one true anime, actually.
Exactly.
Episode over. Thanks for coming, guys. Anyway, to get back on track, Teen Titans is really what kind of got the ball rolling in America for American shows trying to emulate the more anime style and succeeding and having positive reception.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was the first major one. And then we would see some like quietness for quite a while. We'd see some shows that we'll kind of talk about later that were a little getting on the bandwagon but wouldn't commit to it fully. And then something beautiful came along, a masterpiece that anyone who's seen it will agree is truly a shining gem of our generation, this pinnacle of animation and storytelling, and just a pure pleasure to watch, and that is the lovely, the illustrious Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Words cannot describe my feelings for Atla. Like, it is just a gorgeous, wonderful, interesting, fantastic, beautiful show. And it is not only, like, inspired by the East and cultures of, like, all magnitudes, but it does take obvious inspiration from anime as well. I'd argue not as obviously as Teen Titans, but the inspiration is still there, and I think the big kicker here is that to this day there are still people who would legitimately say that Avatar: The Last Airbender is an anime. They would they loop that into that, and obviously there's semantics there, like, okay, well, it's not technically a piece of media and animation that was produced in the East, so it doesn't technically fall under that category, but the fact that so many people honestly believe that shows that the inspiration it's taken sort of grew its own wings and took flight.
Oh yeah, and I think, well, the aesthetics, you can't argue, are more anime-esque than what you traditionally see in the West, just by the fact that we're working with more, like, anatomically human people rather than, like, cartoon stylistic. But I think the big thing for Atla is the fact that there's no filler. It is all, much like anime, it is all working towards a singular plotted goal. Like, it is all meticulously crafted to lead to a certain point. There is no point where it's, like, fluttering a bit or not moving towards a goal. And I mean, there is one filler episode, but I mean, nobody doesn't like that episode. It's such a satisfying watch, and I have to admit, I slept on Avatar for the longest time, because, when I was a kid, when it was coming out, I was more of a Cartoon Network girl, and, little neighbor boy who was younger than me was really, really into Avatar, and he would, like, go around pantomiming, bending and making his own sound effects to the point where, like, I kind of couldn't stand Avatar when I was younger. I didn't watch it until the summer after my senior year of high school, and I was like, you know what, I'll just kind of watch this over the summer.
Yeah.
I watched it in 2 weeks. I couldn't stop. And I think, like, probably a lot of people have that experience, because it is just so good.
Oh, absolutely. I actually forget when I got into Atla, because it was definitely not when it was originally airing. I was in the sort of same boat as you, kind of, except it was less on the side of, like, oh, I just didn't really feel super compelled, or I was, like, a little bit repulsed by it at first. I think it was more, I don't know what the availability was like, because obviously here in Canada, the broadcasts are a little bit different. I don't have, or at least I didn't have for a large stretch of time, Cartoon Network and Disney and, like, Nickelodeon. We didn't have those. We had YTV was our Nickelodeon, Teletoon was our Cartoon Network, and Family Channel was our Disney.
Family Channel.
It was for the family. But yeah, no, like, we had shows coming across, like, obviously we'd have stuff like SpongeBob and Fairly Odd Parents and sort of that whole side, but we'd also have other shows that come across, and so it was kind of hard to see what was good and see what was bad and keep track of everything at certain times, because the broadcasts were just all muddled. But yeah, no, when I got into Avatar, it was just something that I could not put down because it is just very, very fun and exciting and interesting to watch.
Oh yeah, and I mean, it is now, and I think it'll always be remembered as this just like major turning point, this major mark left on American cartoons, or Western cartoons, excuse me. And to me it's surprising that it then, in our little chronology, there's another time lapse before we start getting into some more notable inspired pieces.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a hard one to come up, but the next piece on our path we're tracking through these influences is a good follow, though. Yeah. It's really strong in its own right, and it is Gravity Falls, which I think, personally, I'd credit it with bringing a lot of attention back to cartoons again. It was a little innocuous at first, like, I wasn't sure what it was. The only reason I really got into Gravity Falls was because I love cryptids and urban legends and stuff like that, and so I thought, okay, this cartoon might be fun. It's a cartoon after all, so I don't know how much I'm going to really enjoy it, but I can look at an episode or two. And I think, like a lot of other people, I found myself really enjoying it, and as time went on, I realized that there was some stuff going on in the background of this world. And, oh my gosh, they're slowly building up to a plot here, and oh my gosh, there are reveals now. This is a full-on plotted show, and I didn't realize it at first. But we got here.
So unlike the last two that we've discussed, like, the obvious change between what we've been talking about is the style. Style is very reminiscent of, like, what we'd expect at that era for, like, traditional Western animation. It's just, like, a lot of round shapes, sort of outlandish proportions, stuff like that, but it was soft, and compared to the very hard, edgy, not like out of the edge, but like, you know, more angular shapes that we were seeing in these older shows like Avatar and Teen Titans. You're saying we saw angular shapes in Avatar: The Last Airbender? Do not edit that joke out. No, I can't. I have to leave it in now. I'm legally required. But yeah, we were seeing, you know, things that were not what we'd expect from traditional Western animation. Gravity Falls is one of those that, no pun intended, falls into the category of most cartoons. And we kind of skipped over it. I feel like this is an important one to sort of bring up for animation as a whole. Adventure Time, while not exactly taking major inspiration, there's smaller elements present, but Adventure Time kind of kicked off this renaissance for cartoons that, like, would really, like, it's still kind of reverberating to this day, but, like, this new movement of cartoons that we hadn't really seen. Stuff like, like, it started stuff like Gravity Falls, and eventually cartoons that, like, we're still obsessing about to this day. And so this new wave of animation comes out. Adventure Time's good, but, like, that was sort of, I was starting to get back into cartoons when that came out, and naturally Gravity Falls starts airing on Disney or Family or whatever the heck you want to watch it on. I caught it pretty early on, and I could tell there was definitely something special about it. While there wasn't, like, a huge hint towards a greater overarching plot super early on, it's still a very cleverly written show, and it's, like, for how old I was at the time, like, it was exactly the kind of comedy that I wanted to see and kind of needed to see.
I think you're absolutely right in that Adventure Time kind of kicked off this renaissance of cartoons that we're getting into now, and that's my fault for not mentioning it earlier.
No, that's fine.
I'm a little unfamiliar with Adventure Time because it never quite hit for me. But despite that, it was very important in kind of bringing cartoons around to a different point in their life and kind of turning them into something that was more widely recognized. Because, I mean, we're now really getting into the cartoons that both kids and adults are enjoying at the same time. It's not a matter of, like, we watched these as kids and we're nostalgic about them now. Now it is full-on adults were enjoying this show when it was first airing. And that's a really important distinction in the timeline. Like,
it was really when we started to see that sort of subculture arise that, like, oh no, I'm into cartoons too, even though I'm 17, 18, 20 something. And obviously there is stigma behind that, like, early on especially, like, oh, you're an adult, but you still like watching cartoons. That's a bit interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
But it was kind of well warranted. Like, these are good shows. That is a sign that your cartoon is very well made, that you can attract all of these different audiences, whether they are still young and learning about the world, or whether they have a sort of mature air about them and are interested in these more mature stories you're telling.
Oh yeah, and I think even if Adventure Time didn't immediately kind of get to a narrative, like, it had its smaller arcs within the seasons, if I recall.
Yeah,
but
it sort of dwindled at certain points. I respect Adventure Time for what it started, but it has its ups and downs.
Yeah, for sure. Though we can also connect it back to this kind of influence by anime by the sheer amount of references in that show.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Like, you can tell this was a show made by nerds, which becomes a major factor in this cartoon renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
As I've often said, weeaboos grew up, they're making cartoons now, and it's fantastic.
It is exactly what we needed, I feel, because, like, you know, old cartoons, you can definitely see, like, oh, I'm inspired by all of these other different sources. It shows in my work. References within your cartoon or your anime and all that stuff, that is super, super common, but it doesn't usually play a huge role into the kind of stories they were telling, at least early on. Now, not only were we seeing, you know, the occasional reference to an anime I watched when I was younger, or reference to a video game I played. But now they are also very clearly affecting the narrative as a whole, and as a result of that, we get this fun mix where it's not exactly this off-putting, sort of jarringly different style from what we would expect from traditional Western animation, but it's also not a sort of lowbrow, dumbed-down story that you can just pop into any episode, and you're bound to get sort of a general idea of what's going on, because you don't need any preconceived notions about the story. Like, it is an overarching, interesting story with sort of more mature elements present all throughout, but it is appealing to kids growing up.
It's a sublime blend of the traditional Western cartoon style and the Japanese anime style, and it's just so fantastic to watch. And circling back to something we kind of teased that we'd talk about earlier, but we'll actually get to now, Gravity Falls. This is again when we really start to see that get picked up by Western animators. And Gravity Falls is a great example of one of those shows that you can pretty much watch any episode and have a good time. Like, later on you'll find episodes where you might be a little confused by, what's this weird triangle dude doing? Should I know him by now? But for the most part, you can pick up any episode and just have a good time. There may be allusions and hints to future events, there may be tie-ins to the plot, but it can still be enjoyed without that knowledge or even looking for those things.
No, absolutely. Like, most episodes are very separated. They maybe reference events from previous episodes, some small unrelated stuff that comes back, and you can feel a little sense of accomplishment for having seen previous episodes. But for the most part, it is just isolated incidents that, as you later find out, are all adding towards something far more compelling. And that is, I think, the core of what a lot of these shows start to capture and start to hold on to. Much like the next one that we wanted to talk about here.
Is it the ever contentious?
Oh, the very famous, the almost infamous show that I still enjoy. I love it to this day.
I wholeheartedly enjoy it. I just enjoy it quietly.
Yeah, because of reasons. But Steven Universe is...
Steven Universe.
It is a show that obviously has anime inspiration present all throughout, but again, much like Gravity Falls, much of its episodes are these smaller, unrelated incidents that, as we come to later find out, are a part of a larger plot that eventually does catch up with the rest of the show, and episodes start to become almost entirely focused on telling that story. But very early on, it is just sort of, you know, your usual episodes. Like, stuff that you'd expect from traditional Western animation, goofy stuff where, you're learning more about the characters in non-traditional ways, but you still get a sense of this is not made by somebody who, is trying to emulate your SpongeBob's or your Fairly Odd Parents. It is trying to give you something different, something more.
Mm-hmm. And I think, especially as seasons go on, you get this more dense narrative. Like, in the beginning, not much is really connected, except for when you learn that it's all connected later on. But in recent seasons, almost everything ties into a main overarching plot that it's just the pace is picking up faster and faster.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really unique in that regard. I also think it's unique for the fact that fans, like it or not, the showrunners are every so often going back to these non sequitur episodes where it's more of just like, let's have fun for a little bit, or let's look at something else, which you wouldn't really see in the traditional plot-based anime style, despite having this very almost anime-like plot. Like, Steven Universe in its plot is so much like an anime, it's incredible.
It really is. I mean, you have certain elements that are very anime-inspired, stuff like the crystal gems as magical girl references. That's very blatant. You see that early on, and that's kind of the angle that the story seems to be taking. It's more of a, like, mysterious, supernatural magic type of story, but later on it becomes more clear that it's going for sort of like a space sci-fi type story. But that idea of like, oh, we're gonna do magical girl references, and more specifically the character of Pearl being heavily coded with Utena references, like, that stuff is like right up in your face, and you just kind of take it all and you embrace that.
Oh yeah, and I think that's the reason why Steven Universe has appealed to so many people and gotten even more famous than a lot of these other shows, for better or for worse. Because, like, it is dead set very much trying to appeal to anime fans, and I think it's succeeded. And I guess less so than some of the other shows in some aspects. I'd say that it's trying to be a Western anime.
Yeah.
But it still retains some of what makes Western cartoons, and that distinction. But it definitely has driven things forward and has gotten so much attention for, like, cartoons in that community. And speaking of riffing on magical girls, that does bring us to our next little moment in this timeline, and that is something that has a very special place in my heart. Star vs. the Forces of Evil. Something that I initially wrote off as just this, like, silly, goofy show that wouldn't really go anywhere, that was kind of annoying, but you know what, I need something to eat my cereal and watch, so, like, why not turn on an episode of Star? And then, as time went on, much like some of the other shows, I started to see things are falling into place. Oh my gosh, here's a plot.
So, in a similar way to, I guess, Gravity Falls, it was a show that I picked up super early, and kind of I let it take me on a bit of a journey. I remember I saw the Comic-Con trailer for the show when Disney was still doing all of that stuff, and it seemed interesting, it seemed different. I figured I'd check it out when it released, and the thing about Star Versus is it has a very slow start, and it's a lot like Steven Universe in that it covers a lot of non sequiturs early on, but Star Versus kind of has a sort of self-aware shift in the quality. It's not so much, oh, we're making a show and we wanted to start things off slow before getting into a bigger plot. It kind of realized that things weren't working, certain characters weren't working, and said, you know what, no, we're gonna do without this stuff, and we're gonna start to tell something that, might be more interesting to people. And once the plot picks up, even in the smallest ways, it suddenly changes the quality altogether, and it just made for something that was super fun and entertaining to watch.
Oh yeah. Oh, it has grown into a fantastic show. Just last night I ended up watching it with my adult cousin, who, she has children, so she was introduced to it through them.
Mhm.
But she legitimately enjoys it just like me, because once Star hits its pace and starts running, boy does it sprint. Like, it has such an interesting world and narrative, and it's so willing to listen and hear what it's doing wrong and what it's doing right and make appropriate changes, that the jumps in quality in this show are just phenomenal. And at this point, all I can really say about it is it knows exactly what it's doing, and it's the most willing to kind of like wink and nudge and say like, did you see that? Did you see what's going on here? One of my favorite things about Starverse actually is the kind of meta-ness that it even started with, in the fact that Star Butterfly is meant to kind of be a parody on the whole concept of Mary Sue's. And I mean, if you dwelled in fandoms long enough, you'll already know what that term means, but if you don't, quick lesson. A Mary Sue is a fan character who is just way too perfect. They're often characterized by their love of rainbows, how everybody enjoys them. They're so powerful. They have all the power in the world, but they're so kind and fun-loving, and just everyone should love them. If you're a Mary Sue, if everybody loves you, you have all the power, and you have a tacky, flashy design that usually involves rainbows.
Just no flaws whatsoever.
No flaws. And Star hits those beats, and she's definitely supposed to be a joke on that trope, but at the same time, she's that sort of character, but then they recognize the flaws in that, and they show what a character like that could potentially grow into.
It is very indicative of what we were mentioning before, this idea of all of these animators are weebs now, and that kind of referencing something so very precise within fandom culture is you couldn't possibly expect to see the like, oh, you know, like we get making OCs, we get making overpowered characters, it happens, you know, like we're trying to appeal to people who also grew up and did those things, and we'll probably like encourage people to grow up and sort of follow through with that sort of pattern. It's an understanding of what kids have been into, what kids are going to be into, and it takes that and throws it right in your face so that you know that the content that you're getting is from people who are aware of its fan base. It is very aware of the type of people who will enjoy it.
Absolutely. The meta-ness in Star is just fantastic, and it adds more to just, like, a consistently great show. And I think, like, if I recall correctly, Starverse of the Forces of Evil is what really kicked off me and Kyle's habit of watching cartoons together.
I think so, yeah. I think that was the first one that we really was like, alright, well, we're just gonna watch cartoons now.
Yeah, no anime anymore. We're gonna watch cartoons. We're gonna be big babies and watch cartoons.
Anime is over, cartoons are in.
Anime cancelled, cartoons only.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, like, going back to the whole, like, discussion of meta-ness within Starverse is, like, obviously, you know, Star as a Mary Sue type character and the elements of magical girls in this world. But then you get characters who are just completely 100% unabashed parodies of actual magical girl content, like the character of Mina Loveberry as just a walking, talking, living Sailor Moon reference.
Sailor Moon is just in the show and, like, a little off her rocker, but you look at that and it's just Sailor Moon, you guys.
It's never annoying or it's never too much. It is always just, oh, Sailor Moon's here, and she is just this washed up magical girl. It is so entertaining to see that sort of angle for a character like that. I never got tired of any sort of scenes that Mina was in, and it is, again, a perfect instance of, like, these are people who grew up watching anime and as a result are going to let that inspire them and sort of push them towards a certain direction when doing their show.
And I'm so happy that Star exists, because it's this great synthesis of creators understanding the type of people who they're catering to for the most part, and kind of really embracing that fan base and just saying, like, yeah, we're like this too, we're all like this, let's have some fun together. And so now we have one more cartoon on our Cartoon Renaissance section here that is unique in that, yes, it's kind of inspired by anime. Yes, it takes this whole idea of having these, like, kind of here and there episodes before kind of diving into a plot, but it's also equal parts just general nerd culture that has inspired it, and that is OKKO, a show that has just recently started airing.
I love I love me some OKKO. I love it so much. I remember I watched the pilot when it came out, and that was what really sort of threw me onto the show. It was one of those sort of Cartoon Network pilots that they were airing online, but they were for non-existent shows, essentially. And stuff like this, and another big one that people were going on about, Infinity Train, 12 Forever, those type of pilots were being pushed online, and everyone was just so adamant to see them animated and turned into their own series. So when I saw OKKO finally get produced, I was ecstatic, because it's a fun, goofy show that is very, this is gonna be inspired by video games and anime and that sort of stuff. Like, it is super obvious. Like, KO's whole character design looks like he's straight out of Street Fighter. It's not in the slightest way trying to be sly about its inspirations, but it also does kind of cleverly and subtly do other bigger stuff within its whole runtime. It is just very, very well done and very exciting to see that kind of show now being produced, because had it come out when I was a kid and I was super into this type of content, I would have lost my mind.
You would have lost your mind, and you're even losing it now.
Exactly.
OKKO is just such a love letter to nerd culture as a whole. And it almost feels like it's this gift made for nerds, and it's for kids too. I never want to say any of these shows aren't for kids, because they absolutely are.
100%.
But there's so much affection shown towards the nerdy community that has slowly built up and slowly, accepted, hey, cartoons are really fun too, and we should watch them. And I just think that is so great and so special.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with this most recent season of OKKO, they're really starting to get to knuckle down and get into a plot,
mm-hmm.
which I almost didn't expect at first, because when you first showed me this show, I almost wrote it off. I was like, okay, Kyle, this is,
mm-hmm.
I get it, it's a gamer reference, gamers only, but this is just too silly. And then as I watched, I was like, okay, this is cool. Alright, okay, I see what they're doing here. And then season 2 comes in and just slaps you with actually, conspiracy time. And it's just a joy to watch, and I really feel like, even though it's not really the most anime-inspired of all the things we've talked about so far, it really is just this culmination of love being shown towards these nerdy people who grew up with stuff like anime and video games, and now they might have kids, and they can kind of almost share that with their kids in the form of the show OKKO.
Absolutely. I think this is the perfect example of the transition that we've sort of been seeing over the years, because you had, at the very start of this all, shows like Teen Titans and Avatar: The Last Airbender that were sort of trying to emulate the things that it was inspired by, style especially, but story was very much, something that you'd expect from a common anime. And then, as time went on, the Western style was used alongside these more, complex, mature narratives, until eventually we get what is, OKKO is essentially just your average, everyday cartoon, but it's got some of the most entertaining and witty, clever writing, alongside interesting characters, both design and personality-wise, and it is building into the kind of storylines that kids will remember and love to death, because they are these continuous, interesting narratives that you kind of want to wait until the next episode to see. It is that perfect blend that I just can't get enough of.
It's so true. It's a joy to watch. If you haven't watched OKKO, at least give it a chance. It's really fun. It's another bite-sized one with 11-minute episodes. Yeah. But it's, like Kyle said, it's this perfect show of what modern-day cartoons have become, and it just feels good. As, the kind of nerdy people we are, it feels good to be able to share this with each other, with other people our age, other adults that we know, as well as, children. Mm-hmm. I was sitting outside today with my 7-year-old cousin, drawing OKKO characters for her.
The fact that you could just connect with a kid who is getting into the show as well, you who has a full understanding of the show, that sort of connection there, that's a good thing. And I feel like it is kind of common for a lot of people, especially within fandom, who are loving these cartoons, to kind of gatekeep to children who are the actual demographic of these shows. Like, that is actual kind of villain stuff, and it's sad to see, actual adults say, no, this is not for kids to enjoy, this is for me. Like, if we kind of both say, like, all right, adults can enjoy this, kids can enjoy this, let's let that happen, and let's let both parties be interested in the same thing, have something to talk about. That's good for everybody, I feel.
Absolutely, and it's just another great reason why, like, cartoons have really come into their own recently in the West. And it's kind of started with anime, but what it really came down to was people who grew up with some kind of nerdy stuff and then decided that they wanted to share that passion with the world. And now that we've been a little sentimental, we're going to get into a bit of a lightning round of some shows that maybe tried their best, but didn't quite make it. And I think Kyle is about to explode, so I'm going to let him lead us off with something that I luckily avoided, but he did not.
Oh my god. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, the Canadian-American broadcast, they're a little bit different. So I had different shows growing up, and I had different broadcasting networks. But one of the shows that I did unfortunately grow up with was a show called Kappa Mikey. And the show itself is very self-aware that it is trying to emulate this, anime style, because it is about an American man who goes to Japan to star in an anime. And so you have this character who is drawn in a traditional Western style, who is alongside these characters that are in a traditional Japanese style. Now, this is a show that was made here in the West, so naturally it's going to have kind of a lower budget as well for what it is trying to do. I remember only a few things about this show because it's been ages, but today I did watch the first episode of it to remind myself what it was. And it is... I'm not sure if it's the best thing or if it's the worst thing, because it has moments that shine through where I'm not sure if the show is trying to play itself straight, or if it's trying to be like, this is ridiculous, what we are doing is ridiculous, but we are going to look at it, sort of sly wink at the audience, and say, yeah, no, we're gonna have fun. I don't know anymore. And it is jarring to go back and see that sort of things as an adult, because I know as a kid I was like, yeah, this is ridiculous. Even I, a child, am not going to enjoy this show because it is just kind of gross at times. It has some of the most bizarre choices of expression, and like the use of, we have characters that are designed to be, traditional anime style, but the way they move and the way that their animation is compared to stuff like Mikey, who is a character that is super fluid in all of his movements. It is so much. So Kappa Mikey is a show, and I don't think I am legally allowed to say if it is bad or good.
It's amorphous, and it's almost like a Biohazard in show form, from what I gather.
Essentially. Also very worth mentioning, the show, when it was first being produced, it had the audacity in press releases to market itself as the first anime to be produced entirely in the United States. If that's not big dick energy, then I don't know what is.
You know what? You kind of gotta respect them for going for it.
It was so much. I'm not gonna give that to them, I'm not gonna throw them that bone, but trying to do that? Amazing.
Amazing. Alright, and so now I'm going to go into a show that is better than Kappa Mikey, from what I understand, and Kyle doesn't know this one, so I'm going to talk by myself for a bit here. But I'm sure all you lovely people out there will know what I'm talking about, unlike some people around here. And that is a little love of mine from the past called Code Lyoko. And now this show is interesting because it's very anime-inspired. It's kind of a lot more serious and at times much darker than a lot of stuff that you'll see on this list. But it's not American, it's not Western. It was actually French. And so it's this strange example of seeing this show that's very much inspired by this boom of anime, but it's not from the West at all, it's completely in the middle of Europe. And so just like, it got dubbed and it got pretty popular in America, like almost everyone I know watched this show. Again, almost everyone. I blame Canadian television for sleeping on this gem.
It was on. It was definitely airing. I just didn't watch it because all the characters look like they have
I'm sorry.
billboards for foreheads.
I'm sorry, were their foreheads too much for you?
They were very big, and I did not like looking at them.
They had a cat girl that was a boy.
I love that. But I refuse to watch it.
You don't understand. And you call yourself a computer guy. You call yourself a programmer and you didn't even watch Code Lyoko. That's what it is, Kyle.
I hate it.
It's you. You're Jeremy. Is that it?
I think that's good. I love cartoons. You love cartoons. We love anime. We just love watching good things. So I think embrace that side of yourself. Embrace that inner child and just have fun.
Have fun, and we'll see you next time at the Digital Dream Club. Thanks for watching.